Fuko Izumo, the unlucky girl whose most significant trait is her massive melons, has experienced nothing but sorrow in her life due to her utterly despicable ability, Unluck, which kills anyone that makes physical contact with her. She plans to kill herself, but then encounters a strange man, Undead, whose most significant trait is being naked, and has also experienced sorrow because he can't die. Together with some luck, or better still, unluck, they find a way to kill Undead. On the 1st of August 2120 in Shinjuku, our protagonist has just finished reading a romance manga, and with a smile on her face, she happily says, "Since I'm done with the manga, it's time to end myself." The show has just started, but I had to pause and drink cold water because I couldn't understand what the flip was going on. She stands on a bridge above a railway, and just as she's about to catch the next train to heaven, Undead shows up and says, "Hey," stopping her in her tracks. Damn, I'm all about the railway puns today. She turns and starts blabbing about not being able to enjoy romance with this body and proceeds to pull out a knife, telling Undead to stay away from her. She tells him that if he touches her body, he'll contract a deadly disease. It would seem as though Undead was wearing invisible AirPods Pro because the dude literally ignores her and walks right up to her. He splits my consciousness in two when he walks into the knife she's holding. Fuko is shocked and afraid, and I'm even more terrified. Undead then grabs onto her face and tells her he's never heard of any deadly disease transmitted by touch. As soon as he drops her down, he gets all excited that he's touched her face and begins to wait for the disease to manifest. Fuko's countenance changes, and she tells him her unluck is coming like clockwork. The edge of the bridge where Undead was standing splits, and he falls into the line of a moving train and dies instantly. Or that's what I think. Fuko feels horrible about this and blames the fact that she wasn't able to kill herself fast enough. Just then, Undead's head flies onto the bridge from the other side of the bridge. I sincerely don't know why these things still surprise me, considering his name is Undead. He tells Fuko he now understands what she means and then regenerates his body much like Eren Yeager from AOT. And now, the dude is completely naked. It's understandable knowing his clothes can't also regenerate. Fuko is so terrified, thinking he's a zombie, and she lands a blow on his windpipe and scrambles to safety. Undead flies towards her and grabs her, and then some officers head towards the bridge. Undead then carries her and flies away to the top of a skyscraper. On top of the building, he explains to Fuko that he can fly by regenerating his torn-off legs at high speeds and using the momentum to push himself in the air. He tries to get away again, but he grabs her by her leg and leaves her dangling over the building. He tells her to explain her unluck power, and he'll help her. She tries to threaten that he'll unleash her unluck, but he tells her he's holding onto her trousers and not making direct contact. He swings her around, and she finally agrees to talk out of fear. And just in case you forgot, Undead is still naked. After she calms down, she begins to narrate her story. She tells Undead how her parents died 10 years ago when she kissed them goodbye on their cheeks just before their flight. The plane suddenly developed an unexpected engine failure and crashed, killing both her parents and all 270 passengers. Up until this point, I knew Undead was a madman, but he grows even madder in my sight when he grabs onto her bare skin, dangling her jugs like two oranges. Just after she told him this depressing story, she begins to shout, telling him he'll trigger the unluck again, and he says he knows, he's just testing it out. Suddenly, a box of bananas falls from an airplane and smashes Undead. Fuko seizes the opportunity to run, but she slips on a banana peel and starts falling from the building. For someone who wanted to kill herself, she was sure afraid of death. Undead manages to save her and then tells her she can't die yet because she's the one who will give him the death that has been evading him. He then carries her to his hideout. A group of men, with one man speaking to someone on the phone, tells the person that they're going to abduct Fuko after confirming her ability. Back at Undead's hideout, he tries to understand more about the rules of unluck. He tells her to strip for him, and she starts running away, beating Usain Bolt's record in a heartbeat. Undead chases after her, and her jacket hooks on a piece of metal and she falls, revealing very bushy hair. She tells Undead that she's never cut her hair because no one will touch it. I don't even understand. Couldn't they wear gloves? Undead then begins to cut her hair, and at first she complains, but he tells her not to let go because it's only when they stop making contact that the unluck will strike. Suddenly, those group of men, the same ones we saw earlier, take off Undead's head. They put him in a special capsule, and this guy explains that they're not on her side. They're people who police unselected negators such as Undead and Unluck. Now that's when her unluck actually kicks in, striking Undead and killing the person holding the special capsule in the process. Undead breaks free and flies up. They all attack him, thinking he's useless at combat. Ultimately, Undead swipes all 4 of their heads with one strike. Their leader then tells Undead to cut off his head and throw it to him. Otherwise, He kills Fuko. Undead does this, and when he throws his head, Fuko breaks free and kisses him on the cheek. Their leader catches Undead's head, and then we see the biggest stroke of bad luck in the entire episode. A meteorite from outer space strikes Undead, killing him, the leader of the group, and destroying the building in one move. At this point, I realize this girl's power is insane and totally useless except for mass destruction. She survives, and unsurprisingly, Undead survives too. Fuko introduces herself and asks Undead for his name. When he tells her to just call him Undead, she names him Andy. Andy tells Fuko that since only a kiss did this, maybe they should both get down to the dough. Fuko sprints away again. Undead still insists that he and Fuko get down to business, but she tells him that if he forces her, the unluck won't be unlucky enough, since the more she likes a person, the bigger the unluck. And somehow, Undead believes her story. He takes her to his hideout, where he gives her a lot of heavy armor for protection because the guys that attacked them before will definitely come again. He tells her they captured him 50 years ago and he was in a lab for 10 years. This scares the daylight out of Fuko. Together, they hit the road and begin traveling on a motorcycle. Suddenly, the sky begins to crack, and Andy tells Fuko that the guys who caught him 50 years ago shot out from something like this. Suddenly, a robot-looking thing emerges from the sky and gives Andy a punch. Fuko falls to the floor but then gets up to run towards Andy, only to find out she's running backward and she gets caught by the handsome-looking individual. Andy breaks away and tries to attack the big chunk of metal, but he stops abruptly and drops to the floor. Fuko thinks it's the same fellow that caught her that stopped Andy, but it wasn't. It was the big-looking guy. Okay, I haven't found a perfect name for him yet, but I'll get there. Andy says that these two guys are external targeting restrainer-type negators, and while their powers may seem similar, it's totally different. Mr. Robot paralyzes his body, while Mr. Sexy has Fuko's will. Andy realizes he can move whenever he's been hit, so he and the Heavy Machinary enter a slugfest, and not gonna lie, this robot packs a punch. His royal sexiness explains to Fuko that Andy is quite impressive, considering he can still feel every ounce of the pain. Fuko then asks him why they're chasing them, and if they will chase them forever. He tells her that the meteorite incident blew up her capture priority level from 5 to 8, and that's ridiculously high, so even if they manage to get away from them, other Negators will still come for them. Fuko then asks why they aren't chasing them since they're also Negators, and he tells her they're 10 members of the Union, and they're all Negators, and they're the ones who go after people, not the other way around. Suddenly, Fuko asks that if she joins the round table of the Union, would they stop chasing her and Andy? Mr. Sexy says yes, but tells her that the table is filled up right now. Unless they manage to kill a member of the table, only then can they enter. Just then, Jumbotron tries to smash Fuko, but Andy saves her. Andy then touches her face with his bare hands, and the unluck that followed was a truckload of disaster, literally. The truck smashes into Andy and the two guys, but they all escape unscathed, and Andy flies into an uncompleted building. To defeat Negators, you have to find out what they're negating, and that's exactly what Andy was trying to do by flying up and down. I don't know where dynamites came from, but boy, was there a lot of dynamite in the building Andy was. They all explode at the same time, bringing the building to a pile of rubble. Andy uses this opportunity to kill Man of Steel by shooting him in the head with his finger. Just how many names have I given Robot Dude? Now there's one seat open in the Union, but Andy wants another so that he and Fuko can join together. He begins to fight the other guy who apparently is a master at Kung Fu or whatever that was. Fuko shows up at the point and tosses Andy his sword, and just as he's about to strike, he freezes because that guy used his power on him. His handsomeness asks that they pick who will go and who will not, and Andy easily says Fuko should be the one to join the 10. They can take him to the lab. Fuko is displeased because if this happens, it means she wasn't able to give Andy the death he wanted, so he begs the handsome guy to turn around, saying she wants to do X-rated stuff with Andy. Okay, now I was totally into this scene, but guess what? Andy refused. Damn, why? He says he's not desperate enough to bang a chick that's desperate. The guy gets very interested in both of them and lets them go. He even gives them a tip on where they can find another member of the 10 so they can kill the person and join the Union. He tells them it's the person with a red tie and the emblem. He also tells them if they manage to do it, he'll put in a good word for them. And ultimately, he vanishes back into the crack. And with that, they begin their journey to Russia to kill another member of the 10. They head on a boat, and Fuko is petrified because the handsome guy told them many people will still attack them on the way. Andy gets pissed off and drags her, telling her to enjoy the boat ride. Just then, battle planes begin to attack them, firing too many bullets. Andy swerves easily and then pulls off an insane move when he uses his fist as a torpedo that destroys one of the planes. Not even gonna lie, this guy makes not being able to die look very cool. Fuko asks if they're now in the Union, and Andy tells her they've not killed the person with the emblem yet. He tells her about the 3 members of the Union he knows off the top of his head. The person who made the katana he uses, Unbreakable. The engineer-like guy who experimented on him and the person who caught him. A female who creates invisible barriers. He tells Fuko of his weakness that while he can't die, if he's trapped within an enclosed space where he can't regenerate, he's practically useless. Just then we see a lady that seems to be from outer space. She professes her love for Andy and proceeds to fire some missile-like object at him. I really don't understand what kind of twisted love this is. Their ship explodes, and Fuko sinks to the bottom and is crushed by a chunk of the ship. Andy saves her, and when she finally comes to, he surrenders to the guys chasing them. Fuko asks if he's really surrendering, and he tells her he's just buying time. Apparently, Andy had to give Fuko CPR, and her bra was in the way of her melons, and he also gave her mouth-to-mouth. Upon hearing this, Fuko's unluck activated immediately, and a kind of explosion in the ocean sent them flying, and Andy navigated to the top of one of the battle planes. He performs one insane move and slices the head of the pilot, and they take over the plane. Andy then tells Fuko that with this new information, he'll be able to make sure her unluck ability no longer poses as a fluke, but something that can be controlled. After flying for a few hours, the enemies discover that they've swiped their plane and made the plane self-destruct. They eject from the plane, and Andy performs another killer move he called the 5-point landing, where he lands on parts of his body and quickly regenerates them. This guy is awesome for real. Fuko lifts her head and sees a beautiful view. Undead introduces the view as Lake Baikal and tells her to go have some fun while he tracks down his former friends and gets them something to eat. She doesn't want to because she doesn't know anyone, and ultimately anyone she comes in contact with is going to die. So what was even the point? Eventually, he leaves her, and she makes her way down to the beach in front of the lake. She's confused and lost and is avoiding everyone until she meets a female who happens to also be Japanese and was painting the lake. The lady invites her to take a seat and paint too. She reluctantly agrees, and after they paint for a while, the lady asks a very deep question. She asks if Fuko prefers stuff that changes or stuff that stays the same. Even for me, this was a difficult question, and likewise, Fuko told her to give her a bit of time before answering the question. The lady tells Fuko that she prefers things that never change, and they continue painting. It's nighttime now, and the lady asks Fuko to show her what she drew. Fuko is initially shy, but eventually shows her. It's a drawing of the moon above the lake, but the difference was that there were sparkling things beside the moon. The lady asks what those were, and Fuko tells her that the moon looked a bit lonely, so she gave it some friends. She proceeds to tell the lady that she prefers things that change, and then tells the lady all about the weird person she's been traveling with, and how he has made her change a lot. That's when it happens. The lady walks towards the lake and starts walking on water like Jesus Christ, and suddenly a portion of the lake rose up. This lady is, in fact, the member of the Union they were looking for, and the one who captured Andy 50 years ago. Andy comes rushing in from nowhere, and she ultimately blocks him with invisible barriers, and Andy calls out her name, Gina. Meanwhile, Handsome, who we now know to be Master Shen, is distracted from his meditation as he reminisces on the battle with Andy and Fuko. He really wishes to meet them again, and his aide Mui tells him that Gina has encountered Andy and Fuko, and they're entering battle now. He tells Mui that those two have a lot of things up their sleeves, and he's sure they will overcome this obstacle. Back to Andy, Fuko, and Gina. Gina begins to tell Andy how much she's missed him, and Fuko asks her if she was the one who captured him 50 years ago. Gina confirms it, surprising Fuko because Gina looks about the same age as she does. Andy is about to spill the beans about how Gina was 16 when she caught him, and she should be 62 years old now, and how the Union's anti-aging procedure is working for her. But she uses a barrier to shut his mouth. Andy slices his own mouth, and it regenerates back. Gina then begins to tell Fuko about how she abducted Andy 50 years ago, and fell in love with him because of how cool he is. She tells Andy to join the Union since there's an open seat, but Andy refuses. Gina decides that all she has to do is kill Fuko, and the battle begins. Andy throws some grenades, but they don't even lay a scratch on Gina, and then Gina begins to attack. making Andy flee with Fuko on his back. He tells Fuko that he is trying to figure out a way to beat Gina, and that's when Fuko asks about Andy's friends, and he tells her they're all dead. Not quite the turn of events I was expecting at this point. Gina takes off her massive hat, and it suddenly starts spinning. She throws it at Andy and Fuko, but Fuko raises her legs, so only Andy gets his legs cut off. Andy finally sees it, why Gina was negating, and he makes a plan. As soon as they land, he sets off a grenade and swallows it, then cuts off his head and throws it in the air before regenerating his whole body. The grenade explodes, spilling blood everywhere, and we could all see Gina's power as clear as day. She doesn't simply make invisible barriers, she has invisible hands that are all around her. Andy calls this power unchange, and he says since he can see it, he can easily avoid it. He falls down after exploding, and Fuko rushes to catch his head, which infuriates Gina. She accuses Fuko of charming Andy with her melons, and they exchange words. Gina tells Fuko that one day her beautiful melons will begin to fall, and they continue fighting. Andy maneuvers easily, and later hits his head on an invisible object and falls into the river. Gina tells them that she was on a mission to investigate a UMA and they were interfering, and suddenly, the invisible spaceship takes form. The fight intensifies when Gina rushes toward them, wielding the sharp cap. Andy blocks, and they exchange blows. Andy backs away and splashes a trail of blood underneath her. Suddenly he notices an opening in the invisible barrier through the moonlight. There's a hole in the barrier beneath her feet, and he and Fuko work together to throw his head inside. He knows that there is no form of unluck from outside the barrier that could hurt her, so he blinds her with his blood, lifts the barrier from underneath so the hole is now up, and has Fuko throw his head into the barrier like a shot put. His head enters, and immediately Fuko's unluck hits. A light from the ship fires both Andy and Gina, obliterating them, and obviously Andy regenerates, but Gina is lying there at the point of death. Andy and Fuko have managed to defeat Gina and now have secured the second opening on the Union's round table. Before Gina dies, she and Andy kiss one last time. Trust me, this was the most toxic of toxic relationships. So there you have it with all the negators so far. Undeed, unluck, unavoidable, unbreakable, unchange. And there's me, unbothered about how my life is falling apart. Fellow weebs, if you enjoyed this anime recap, then you need to watch this next video right here, or even this playlist. But be ready for the ultimate weeb binge session if you do. See you in the next recap.